Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, and today we're going to be discussing the top books I read in 2020. I had quite a difficult time trying to cut this list down to just top 10 because that is only 10% of the books I read this year. I read a total of 100 books this year, so trying to cut it down and narrowing it down to like my ultimate favourites were really hard because although I only rated 13 books 5 stars, minusing the rereads I did, I still gave a lot of really high 4 stars I still absolutely loved and enjoyed. So not only are we doing a top 10, like my best books of 2020, I also want to give a shout out to some honourable mentions of books that I either reread this year or highly rated 4 stars that I absolutely loved. So we're going to start with my honourable mentions. The first book I want to shout out is literally like my favourite book of all time. I absolutely love this book. It's not the most like well-written book. It doesn't like pack a punch. It doesn't have really important topics in it, but it just makes me feel so warm and fuzzy inside that when I think of this book, I think of home and comfort. And when I'm sad or I don't know what book to read or I'm feeling like I'm in a slump, I will pick up this book and just instantly fall in love with reading all over again. So of course I reread this book this year, and that book is Billy and Me by Giovanna Fletcher. Absolutely adore this book. Reread it for like the 4th time this year. Obviously gave it a 5 stars. This book basically follows a young girl called Sophie May who lives in a quaint town in the English countryside. Not much happens in her town at all, so when a film production company arrives and rocks up at their doorstep, like there's all this like hub and bub happening in this village for once. Like this isn't like their usual thing, so everyone gets really excited. And Sophie works in the local tea shop on the hill with her best friend, or who becomes her best friend during this book, called Molly, who is like 70 years old. And when Sophie is working one of her shifts, she meets a boy called Billy. Little does she know he is the main star of this film that's being recorded here, and they fall in love and have a really cute romance in a quaint English town, and it's just the most adorable book ever and I absolutely love it. I gave this book a 5 stars, of course. It's just one of those warm, comforting reads for me that I absolutely love, so I had to give a shout out to this book in this video. The second honourable mention I wanted to give a shout out to was Fredrick And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer. I read this book originally a couple of years ago, and although I enjoyed it, I don't think I really got the full impact of this story. I don't think I truly understood what Fredrick was trying to portray in this book. However, rereading it this year after my granddad had slowly passed away from dementia, this book really packed a punch for me this year, and it's one of my favourite books of all time now. This book basically follows the relationship between a grandson and a grandfather who have a really close relationship. However, this grandfather is suffering from dementia, and he's trying to tell the grandson in a way that the grandson can understand what his mind and body are going through, and how every morning, because of his mind and how he's forgetting things, gets longer and longer. And the book is basically told inside the grandfather's head with different things that allow the grandson to understand. And I don't cry at books, but this year reading it and having like a more connect to this story now that I have known someone who's passed away from dementia, it just really hit home and I absolutely love this book. I had to give it a shout out, but it didn't make my top 10 because this is a reread for me. The next book I wanted to give a shout out to is a middle grade that I absolutely loved, but it didn't quite make the 5-star cut, and that is Ivy Aberdeen's Letter to the World by Ashley Herring Blake. This book basically follows a little girl called Ivy who, of a way of expressing herself, draws girls holding hands in this journal. But one day when a tornado rips through her family's home, the only thing that she can kind of save is this journal. But one day this journal goes missing, and she kind of starts to explore and understand the reasons why she feels drawn to drawing these characters in her journal, and she meets people across the way who kind of allow her to be herself and express herself. And I think the way Ashley Herring Blake wrote about this book and this topic, which is that you can just kind of be who you want to be without any restrictions, for a middle grade audience, was absolutely incredible, and I absolutely love this book to no end. I loved it so much. The final honourable mention I wanted to mention in today's video is Thunderhead by Neal Shusterman. Once again, this is a reread for me. When I first read it a couple of years ago, I didn't really get the hype of why this second book was so loved. I think I was just on a high from loving Scythe so much, which is the first book, that I didn't really love this book as much and therefore kind of felt disappointed. So when I decided to reread the series this year so I could read Toll for the first time, I think I finally understood why this series is so loved, and I absolutely fell in love with Thunderhead. If you didn't know, Scythe and this series is about a world, dystopian or utopian, you can kind of pick a side, where death has been beat, so you can't die of natural causes, you can't die of any diseases. The only way you can be killed now is by a scythe if they glean you, and it's a random kind of process, and different scythes have different ways of killing people. And it's just about like what is right, like the wrongs and right and the morals of life. And the way he wrote about this world is just so fascinating. I absolutely love this series. It's one of my favourite series of all time. And Thunderhead is my favourite book of that series. Thanks for rereading it in 2020. I now understand the love of this book. Absolutely adored it. Loved it so much. So now we've got the honourable mentions out of the way, it's time to delve into my top 10 books of 2020. Let's do a countdown because I have, with a bit of a struggle, ranked them from 10 to 1. They may change places if you ask me in a few weeks, like some might be bumped up, some might be bumped down. But as of the 30th of December 2020, these are the top 10 books of my 2020 reading year. We're going to start off with one of my more recent reads, and that is Head Over Heels by Hannah Orenstein. This takes number 10 in my list. I absolutely adored this book. I flew through it. I absolutely loved the writing style. It just was such a page turner that I just couldn't put it down. And it just gave me that massive warm fuzzy feeling inside and kind of made me re-realise why I love reading so much. Like, these are the books that make me fall in love with reading. If you didn't know, this book follows a gymnastics coach called Avery, who is an ex-Olympic gymnast, had to quit her Olympic career due to a knee injury. When she comes home from LA after breaking up with her boyfriend, she finds a new job as a gymnastics coach at her old local gymnast centre and falls for a fellow coach there who is currently coaching a possible new Olympic champion, and a romance ensues. But it's not just a rom-com, funny, light-hearted story. It hits some really, really poignant topics and trigger warnings for sexual assault, and there is a fictional NASA type trial in this story that is currently going on in American gymnastics. So just be warned about that if that is something that is sensitive for you. But if not, I highly, highly recommend this book. It was absolutely brilliant. I loved it so much. The lighting today is awful. I'm sorry. At number 9 this year is literally like one of my first books I ever read this year, and to think that I can still vividly remember the plot and love the characters still to this day shows its worth. And for number 9, that is Birthday by Meredith Russo. I pretty much will say I love this book because obviously I do, it's made my top 10. But this book basically follows two characters, Eric and Morgan, who have the same birthday, were born at the same time on the same day, and have a really close friendship, but they only ever see each other once a year on their birthdays, and you follow their relationship. But you kind of follow mainly Morgan, who is struggling to come to terms with being transgender, and you follow his story from when he was 13 all the way up to when he's 18, of trying to discover himself and really define himself and come to terms with his new outlook on life and being transgender. I think this is such a heartwarming story, but really is well written about the topic that it addresses. I am not own voices, but I really felt like it allowed me a deeper insight into how a trans person feels and what their emotions and what they're going through, and I found it really an eye-opening experience, but also it was just such a good book and a fun book to read. I think the balance of serious topic as well as great friendship really was balanced excellently in this book, and I absolutely loved it. So this has number 9. At number 8, we're just going for a fun one, and that is The Heart of Betrayal by E Pearson. This is the second book in the Remnants Chronicles, the first book being The Kiss of Deception. I read The Kiss of Deception back in 2016 and absolutely loved it. I knew I wanted to continue with the series, but never kind of got round to it. I got round to buying the other 2 books in the series this year and read them and absolutely fell in love with them. I just love this series. If you don't know what the series is about, but I think you do, as I think it was quite hyped on BookTube back in the day. But this book basically follows a princess called Leah who runs away on her wedding day, yet the prince that she was meant to marry and an assassin sent to kill her follow her as she runs away to try and live this quiet life. She doesn't want to be in the royal family anymore, and there's political intrigue in this book, yet it's also very heavily a romance book. I think that's why I love it so much, is because yes, it is a fantasy, but it has that really cute, lovable characters that you find in a romance novel, and it's well balanced and it combines the two, and I absolutely love it. This is my favourite book of the series and I had to give it a mention, and it's made my top, this is number 8, I think. Number 7 on my list is one of my favourite books of the year for sure, and that is The Black Flamingo by Dean Atta. I will always remember reading this book because I just read it obviously in one sitting. It's written in verse, so it was so easy to get through. Yet the topics and what Dean Atta managed to cram into this book, mastery, I swear. It was absolutely incredible. This book follows our main character called Michael, who throughout his life never really feels like he fits into any stereotypical group until he goes off to university and discovers the drag society where he really feels at home. I just love this book so much. I think it's such a good self-discovery book, and once again it allowed me an insight into a world that I don't know, and I appreciate reading books like this so I have a clearer understanding of other people's lives and what they're going through and different outlooks on life. One of the reasons why I love reading so much is that you can live 1,000 lives and only be in one body, and I think it's so cool to be able to live and view a different person's world through different eyes, and books allow you to do this, and I love this one for that reason. It just allowed me a massive insight into a whole different world that I have no personal experience in, and absolutely loved it. Dean Atta has easily become one of my favourite authors just because of the way he wrote such a brilliant story in so few words. Absolutely incredible. Love this book so much. Coming in at number 6 is another book written in verse, and my other only book written in verse that I read this year, and that is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. Once again, I can't understand authors who can write in verse and pack a punch so well in so few words. Clap When You Land is about 2 half-sisters who don't know each other exist until their father is flying between visiting the 2 of them. One lives in Dominican Republic and one lives in New York City, and unfortunately the father's plane crashes, and this is only when the 2 of them kind of realise that each other exist, and they go and meet each other and create this incredible bond. And I just absolutely love this story, the way the sisters became a family under the circumstances, the way Elizabeth Acevedo spoke about grief. When I read this book, I hadn't experienced grief before, but now I have. I think I would be able to connect to this book a lot more. I just love this book so much. I just feel like I'm repeating myself so often because I'm like, I love this book, I love this book. But obviously it's my top books of 2020. I'm going to love every single book. But this is one of them. In at number 5, we are halfway through the list. So these are my top 5 books of 2020, like the ultimate books that I read this year. And at number 5, this author had to make the cut. This book I absolutely loved, and I finally understand the hype of it, and that is Anxious People by Fredrick Backman. Absolutely love this book. When a bank robbery goes wrong, you meet a group of people who aren't meant to fit together, and they end up forming an incredible, credible bond when they are held hostage by this bank robber. And it does hit some heavy topics such as grief, suicide. So please be warned before you go into this. Make sure you look at the trigger warnings and make sure this is a book that you could handle, because it is quite heavy. But I am a massive character-driven reader, and this book is purely about the characters. I absolutely loved it. It was so good. This is my first full-length novel by Fredrick Backman, and I think he might become a favourite author of mine. Having only read Every Morning The Way Home Gets Longer and Longer by him, I didn't really know what to expect by his full novel, but I was blown away. This was easily a 5-star book for me. Absolutely loved it. I can't wait to read more of his works in 2021. Am I getting too bright yet? Okay, I was getting blinded in my old filming setup, so I've had to move, but we're closer to my books now, so we're in a new setup now, and we're into my top 4 books of 2020. Oh wow, I've actually miscounted. Not even just in talking about the books, actually making my list I miscounted and put 11 books in. So we'll talk about the added book I put in and thought I'd kind of made up my top 10, but clearly I was like, hey, let's do 11. So I'll continue with my top 10 and then speak about the added extra book at the end. But coming in at number 4, my 4th favourite book of 2020 is The 24-Hour Cafe by Libby Page. I absolutely adored this book. I read it in less than 24 hours. I did a whole 24-hour reading vlog for this book, so I'll link it up above and down below for you guys if you want to hear more of my in-depth thoughts and feelings as I read the book. But this book basically follows two waitresses, Hannah and Mona, who work in the same cafe and take over two 12-hour shifts. You just follow them across a 24-hour period. And the reason I love this book so much is not only because of the characters of Hannah and Mona and their relationship as best friends as well as co-workers, but also the intertwining characters you meet along the way. I didn't really know what to expect when going into this book, but this book is so character driven. If you're a character reader like me, then definitely hit up this book. You meet so many unique and interesting characters along the way in this book. This cafe kind of serves as a hub for everyone. There is a woman who can't look after her child at night. She gets really, really upset and goes into this cafe after a midnight walk, not being able to settle her child. There is a gay couple who come in and one of them has been deported and they're finally saying goodbye, and it's in a really emotional scene. There is a scene with a businessman who is crying because he has lost his job and he doesn't know how to tell his wife. Like, there are so many walks of life that come into this story, and it just really makes you appreciate that everyone is going through completely different things to you and you can't judge them from what they look like or if they're crying in public. Like, you have no idea what news they have just discovered. It just felt so real. The characters felt so alive. I absolutely love this and I'm excited for more of Libby Page's works. Definitely love this book, a highlight of my 2020 for sure. Coming in at number 3 is The Love Square by Laura Jane Williams. I discovered this author this year with her debut novel R-Stop and absolutely loved R-Stop. I actually wanted to put R-Stop on the list, but out of the two of her books I read this year, The Love Square took the lead and therefore I just put this book on. But this book kind of represents them both because Laura Jane Williams hands down became one of my favourite authors this year. Absolutely loved the way she storytells and the characters she writes. This book follows a main character called Penny. She has everything in her life kind of down and fixed in place apart from her love life. She can't really find that guy that she wants to be with. But when she has to go back to her hometown and help run her family pub, I think it's her uncle's pub, but it's someone in her family's pub, she kind of starts to discover the true meaning of love as she stumbles into 3 men's lives. Don't worry, there's no like horrible love triangle trope in this book. I think it's done really, really well. But each guy that she meets allows her to explore and see the world through different eyes, as each of the guys view marriage and love in a different way. There is great LGBTQ plus rep in this book with a non-binary and lesbian couple as well as others. I just think this book was beautiful and so well written, and from the first page I fell in love with the characters. This book had to make my top 3 books of 2020. Coming in at number 2, I don't think it's any surprise because I ramble about this fictional couple through and through all day long on my channel, and that is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. Specifically, volume 3 has made the cut, but I just love the entire graphic novel series. I can't wait for volume 4 coming out in May in 2021. But I think this one made the cut because this was just the volume in the series that really had a turning point for the characters. You kind of really get to understand the characters in this book, not only Nick and Charlie and their relationship, but also their friends and the side characters in this series. You really start to delve into some deeper topics. Trigger warnings for eating disorders and other sensitive topics in this book. I can't remember too many, but I definitely know eating disorders is mentioned, so please be aware before going into this series in general. But this book, they go to Paris on a school trip and it's just a barrel of laughs, and you see them kind of really come to terms with their relationship, and I think it's really where all the characters start mingling together, and I just love this book so much. A lot of people know now, for me, Alice Oseman does not write the best books for me personally. I don't really vibe with them. But one thing I do love about Alice Oseman is her drawing style and the way she brings the characters to life just through still images. I think it's an amazing talent, and when I was rereading volume 1 and 2 to complete my Goodreads goal this year, I really started to look at the pictures and really try and feel what the characters were feeling in those moments of time, and the book just came to life for me. I absolutely love these two characters. They are two of my favourite fictional characters. I absolutely love them to pieces. Nick and Charlie, Heartstopper, had to make my list this year, and they made place number 2. So drum roll! I think if you've been watching my channel for a while, you will know what my favourite book of the year is. All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I love this book so much. Like I said previously, reading books allows you to take an insight into someone else's life that you wouldn't be able to experience for yourself, and this book really packed a punch. I read it twice this year, once as an audiobook narrated by George M. Johnson themselves, as well as a physical read where I tabbed it up with all my favourite things, all the things that made me sad, all the things I learned, all the things that made me happy, like quotes that I want to remember, poignant lessons that I learnt during reading this. I absolutely love this book. It will be a book that I will remember forever and always come back to. There's so many lessons to learn in this book. It's such a beautiful book. George M. Johnson really did it justice. I know this is their life, but the way they wrote about their life just made it so accessible to so many people, and I think anyone at any age can read this book and get something out of it, and it's a book that you can revisit and revisit and revisit and always get something new out of. I think it's going to be a book that I reread every year now, but I just realised I haven't told you what this book is about. Obviously this is about George M. Johnson's life, so it's not a fictional, it is a non-fiction book. But it basically follows George M. Johnson's life from when they were 5 years old right up to when they go off to university. And you start the story where they get bullied and harassed by a gang of white racists and knock George's teeth out when he's only 5 years old, and that's like the triggering point in their life to when they realise that they are different. And you follow them growing up throughout their life, going to school and suffering from racial slurs and bullies and not being able to fit in or being able to identify with anyone. They are black and queer in a minority community, so he's always had a struggle of a life growing up. This book just is absolutely incredible. George M. Johnson is an incredible storyteller, an incredible narrator. I would highly recommend actually checking out the audiobook if you can, because the way they talk about their own life is incredible. Absolutely love this book through and through. Every single page is beautiful. I love it so much. If you haven't read it, please read it. And PS, it's actually being turned into a TV show. I found out yesterday. I went to go follow George M. Johnson on Twitter, and there's a TV show adaptation happening of this book, and I am so excited, like so excited. Yay! So there we have it. Those are my top 10 books of 2020. I can't believe I read 100 books this year and was able to narrow my list down to like 14 books. I know 4 of them are like honourable mentions, but even still I think that is pretty good because I read a lot of 4-star books this year that I thoroughly enjoyed and wish had made this list. If I could just ramble about every single book I read this year minus a few 2 stars that I read, I would, but that wouldn't be very interesting for you or me. So I just decided to do my top 10. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you give it a massive thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe down below to see more content from me. And without further ado, I will see you in my next video. Bye guys. Oh no. I've just turned my camera back on because I forgot to mention one book. You know when I said, oh, I actually made it 11 books by accident. So I need to speak about the book that made the list but didn't really make the list because I'd already made my top 10 and I thought that that fitted into my top 10, but it didn't. I actually made it top 11. So the book that has caused all this mayhem is Olive by Emma Gannon. I read this book very recently. It was my 97th book of the year and absolutely fell in love with it. It is a 400-page book and I read it in a single day. I listened to the audiobook as well as read along as an ebook. Absolutely adored this book so much. This book follows Olive, our main character, who is coming to terms with not wanting children when all her friends are in that stage of life where they are getting married, settling down, having kids, moving to the suburbs. But Olive is just not feeling that way. She doesn't want kids. She knows she doesn't want kids. And she's trying to come to terms with that when society is putting a lot of pressure on her. I don't really know how to describe this book because it is so character heavy that there's not really a plot apart from going through life and Olive trying to come to terms with all her friends going off and settling down when she very much believes that she doesn't want kids. I don't really know how to describe the book apart from the writing was absolutely incredible. The topics addressed in this book were amazing. There is IVF struggles in this book, postpartum depression in this book, as well as lots of other interesting topics discussed. And it was one of those books where I just absolutely loved it, and it was just incredible. It did actually come, if we did a top 11, it was number 3. So really enjoyed this book. Can't wait to have it in my hands, but I will be rereading it when it comes out in paperback for sure. I think it's like mid-year sometime. But without that being said, a little extra added clip, I will leave you to it. I'll see you in my next video. Bye guys.